Yeah, let's do that. You should have the record permission now. Is that working at your end?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Perfect. That's cool.
Cool, man. Okay. Should we do it?
Oh, we're on 2:30. Yeah. Go.
Let's do it. All right. We are. G'day, guys. Welcome. We'll just give it a minute or two for everyone to join in. But thanks for joining us. My name's Ben, and today I'm here with Chris Gray. We're talking about how to buy property like a pro. Guys, just while everyone's joining in, just a little bit of housekeeping as we're going through the content today. Feel free to throw any general chat and banter into the chat box. There is a Q&A function though, so if you've got questions that you'd like us to cover off, you can pop them into the Q&A. We'll do our best to cover off as many as we can as we're going through, and then we'll have a specific time for some questions at the end. Can I just as well, just while people are still coming in, if I could just get someone to pop into the chat, make sure the audio and slides are all coming through okay. Also feel free to let us know where you're joining in from today in the chat. That'd be great. Polly from India, all good, perfect.
And just to make sure you can hear me as well, it'd be good to see someone could say, yeah, Chris is loud and clear as well. Otherwise, it'll be a one-sided conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, we can't have that. And guys, for the chat as well, you're very welcome, obviously, to have your chat to us directly. But if you want everyone else to see your banter, Polly from Gadigal Land, thank you. Just flick that over to everybody, to the everyone option for your chat as well. Cool, guys. So look, welcome. Nice one on joining us on what is a pretty average day. If you're in Sydney, where Chris and I both are, he's normally got a much more stunning view out of his window there, but unfortunately we're dealing with a bit of average weather today. So a good opportunity to learn a bit about money, I suppose. Today we're talking about a bit of a property market update, but how to be smarter with your property decisions. And yeah, I'm pumped to be here with Chris. Chris has been buying property for a very long time. I don't want to give away his age, but yeah, Chris runs Your Empire, which is an expert property buyers agent company, and they actually do a bunch of different things to help people around property as well. I've got a slide here with some like full-on credentials, but Chris, I might just turn that one over to you.
Yeah, sure. And look, for the viewers out there, we've obviously got people from Ben's business in here and from Your Empire as well. We've done quite a few presentations and podcasts over the years. So we thought it would be good to try and combine forces and have a chat. And certainly from our perspective, there's not many financial planners that are pro-property. Most financial planners put people into shares straight away. So that's why we love working with Ben, because he is actually pro-property and has got a much more balanced view. But look, my rough background, started investing at 22, gave up full-time work at Deloitte's at 31. I'm now 50. Most people on my socials have seen me have a dozen 50th parties until COVID stuffed it up. I was trying to get it to 20. But I've got about $22 million worth of property now, and spent about 10 years on Sky News educating people about property. So got a massive passion. And obviously we've got a business that helps people do it as well. So either we teach people to do it for themselves, or we give them a hand and do it. And obviously link up with other accountants, brokers and planners like Ben as well.
Thanks for that, Chris. And look, guys, as we go through, I think that there's and no doubt we'll both elaborate on this in more detail, but there's a lot of different ways to be right when it comes to your money, and a lot of different ways to be right when it comes to property as well. So today, instead of us coming up here saying, these are the surefire 15 steps that you need to take to, be successful with property or be successful with your money. Instead, what we're going to give you is the key things for you to be thinking about and the questions that you need to ask yourself and answer, so that you can make sure that when you are making property decisions or investing decisions, that you're making the right moves for you. So guys, look, please, just before we get into the content, don't rush out and make any life-changing decisions off the back of what we cover. We strongly suggest you seek out personalized advice before jumping in. If you're making $1 million decisions, you should probably be thinking about doing that anyway. So look, a bit of context, and clearly the last couple of years have been pretty abnormal. The COVID situation, the disruption to our life, our work, the economy, share market, property market, everything. But it's got a lot of people thinking, and I think that things have changed for sure. We've seen ultra low interest rates. They're now rising. We're not sure. There's a lot of talk of this new normal, which I don't think we're fully at yet exactly, but what that looks like. The property market has clearly been disrupted, and we'll talk a bit more about that in some of the structural shifts that have happened. People moving to regions, people wanting, houses over apartments or apartments over houses or locations, and etc. And we've also seen, the government's really pumping a bunch of money into the economy. But the reality is that there are a lot of important things that are unchanged. People still want money, not so that they've got just a big pile of money to roll around in, but money to live a good life. The economy is still growing. Businesses are still growing. We just saw the budget come out the other week, and we see the forecast all shaping up well off the back of the COVID disruption and moving in the right direction. And people still want to live in good suburbs. I've got people still want to live in Bondi here because everyone knows Bondi, but people still want to live in good locations where they've got good amenities, easy access to, works and schools and everything else. So in my view, the new normal, it might be a little bit different, but it's still going to be pretty normal. And certainly when it comes to making smart property investment decisions.
Look, you're 100% right, Ben, because two things. So I was doing Sky News for 10 years, and I never had the biggest TV show in the world. So not everyone knows me. People in property circles do. But part of the reason was people would tune in, and I'd say, look, you don't need to tune in every week, especially if you're buying long-term blue chip property. Nothing really changes. I said, tune in once a year. I'll tell you life's okay. Then you can go back to the beach, go on your boat, hang out, do whatever you want to do, come back in a year and I'll tell you it's okay again. And obviously the CEO of Sky News wasn't overly happy about that because they want viewers and people tuning in. But that was the honest truth. And that was the idea of my show, was to tell people the honest truth and not all this sensationalizing stuff. And the second comment is my main book, The Effortless Empire, which we'll tell people how to get for free later on. I wrote it in 2008. And literally now, 14 years later, 2022, we haven't changed a single word. The only thing we changed a few years ago was the average examples before were 500 grand. Now the examples are $1 million. Now we probably need to put them in at 2 million. But the whole thing is interest rates will go up and down, so will rents and all these other things. But the fundamentals of property haven't changed in the 30 years that I've been investing. And that's the good thing. Is property is passive, so you don't have to read the newspapers every day. You don't have to tear your hair out because it's suddenly collapsed overnight. Property is passive. You look at it once or twice a year, ticks along, and then you get on with your life and enjoy your time.
And look, I think it's the same with any good quality blue chip investments. You mentioned at the start that we are pro property, and we are, and I've actually got an example here, which I'll share on that to talk about why we are so pro property. But we are also pro shares and pro super and pro any sort of good quality investments. And I think what you said there, not having to look, every day or every week, I think if you choose good quality assets, good quality investments, when you get started, then you shouldn't need to worry too much about the headlines and what happens week to week. Of course, it makes sense that you want to review what you've got and what your investments are doing, but you shouldn't need to be changing. And property, like good quality shares, like any other good quality investments, is it shouldn't be changing from month to month. It's going to follow the market cycles, and they do get subject to that volatility. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to share this example, which, as I just mentioned, illustrates a bit of why we are so pro property, or why we do feel that property is a really good vehicle for helping people grow their investments and assets. And what I've done is I've compared an investment here of investing $100,000 into a share portfolio versus investing $500,000 into a property portfolio. So I'll explain it a bit of that with the shares first, that essentially if we look at a share investment of if you were to get $100,000 and invest it into a share portfolio, assuming a return of 5%, if you put in $100,000 today, then in 12 months time, your initial $100,000 that you started with would have grown and given you some dividends, which you could reinvest, that the money would now be worth approximately $105,000. Then but if you compare that to a property investment, say at 500,000, you see that with the same 5% return, that because you've got a bigger investment that's growing for you, that your 500,000 would have grown to $525,000. So then I've extrapolated it out over the next 10 years, and you see that it starts to actually blow out. I think I may have a typo in my share example there, but if you see at the end of year 10, the property investment, because it's got this compounding impact of the 5% year on year, and you're starting with a bigger base, that your $500,000 property would be worth around $814,000. You see that the shares, because you're starting from a lower base, I think that I'll update that number before I share the slides around at the end, but the compounding is lower, so the money is worth, it hasn't grown as much. You see 20 years, you keep that growing, that your share portfolio, the 100,000 would have now grown and more than doubled to 265,000, which actually seems really great. But again, because you're starting from a lower base, when you compare that to a property, your $500,000 property has doubled in a bit as well. But because you started with $500,000, it's now worth 1.3. And then, you look at 30 and 40 years and you see that the difference between them, it increases. So I think shares can be a great investment, but if you think about your options of, you got $100,000 saved up that you could use to invest, if you put that $100,000 into a share portfolio, you've just got $100,000 working for you. Whereas if you go borrow a bunch of money off the bank and then put it into a property investment, you got this bigger asset that's working for you. You've used the power of leverage, and then that leverage is going to increase the returns and the effect of the compounding over time.
And look, again, that's 100% correct. And a lot of people, they want the 30-second view. So when I got out of Deloitte's at 31, I only earned 80 grand, and all these partners earn $500,000 or $1 million, but they obviously couldn't retire. And I said, well, ultimately, it's a really simple thing. There's two bits of magic with wealth creation, whether you're into shares, property, or business. It's basically compounding and leverage. So this is the first bit is, and Leo's question there, so you need leverage to buy property? No, you don't. We do have people that pay in cash, but the main advantage is banks will lend you 80, 90, or even 95% because they see it as a safe asset. And you can do it in shares, but generally, because shares are more volatile, or some shares are, generally most people don't leverage. So it's really a 500 grand property, put down 20%, which is where the 100 grand investment is. And that's the thing that suddenly makes the money. So 500 grand doubles to $1 million, whereas 100 grand only doubles to 200 grand. But then the next bit of the magic is then the compounding, which means you want to try and then use that money to pull the equity out to then keep repeating. So you're using one property to buy two, and then two to buy three, and then 4 and 5 and 6. And so by the end of that 30 or 40 years, you've actually then got multiple properties that are then worth tens of millions of dollars. But a lot of people at Deloitte said, no, it can't be that simple. If it was that simple, everyone would do it. But we say our strategy is too simple for most clever people, because most clever people think it's got to be more complicated, so they don't do it. Whereas those with less intelligence just get on and do it. So if you're not super clever, it's a good thing. It might actually be easier for you to implement this.
Well, our business coach has this saying that boring is profitable. And I think when people invest, and we talk to a lot of people thinking about either investing in property or shares or anything else, that they're trying to be a bit too clever, or they want something that's really interesting and exciting. But in my view, if you want excitement, go play video games, learn a hobby. If you want to make money, you can stick to the traditional, the fundamentals, the boring, profitable approach. It doesn't need to be exciting, but it will be effective. And at the end of the day, I think that's what really matters. So I just want to talk about markets and some of the trends that we've been seeing in markets. So I've put here the figures. I just downloaded like the recent property market statistics to the end of March. Essentially, we've seen that. You can see here, Sydney and Melbourne property markets are just below flat. Sydney market's down by 0.2% compared to, and the numbers that's in brackets was the movements for the last month, the last time we updated this. So last month, Sydney, the prior month, Sydney did negative 0.1%. Melbourne was flat. You see that Gold Coast, Adelaide, and Perth, that those markets are still ticking along. And well, when I say ticking along, in fact, if you look at 1.9% growth within a month, it's actually a pretty strong growth for a property market. But and Chris would actually know this much better than I would. But what I've seen anecdotally from the outside is that Sydney, Melbourne markets have tended to lead in the last little bit. A lot of buyers are then looking outside of the Sydney, Melbourne markets, and then that's having a push-up effect on Queensland, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Adelaide, Hobart, and maybe to a lesser degree Perth, although that market seems to be opening up. Chris, what's your take on those numbers?
Yeah, so look, another tip I've got for people is, even though I've been in the media for about 13 or 14 years, is don't believe the media and don't listen to it. Look, you might listen to it, but take it with a pinch of salt. So the reality is, so a lot of the headlines the last few months is Sydney and Melbourne is dropping. And technically it is, because it's minus 0.2. But the median price of property in Sydney at the moment is about 1.1 million. So 0.2% is about $1,500 to $2,000. So this is where the headline is if you say Sydney's $1 million properties have dropped by $2,000, it's not a headline. It's not going to sell papers. It's not going to get you clicking those links. Whereas the reality of the property market boom is over, it's now going downhill. How far is it going to drop? It's dropped $2,000. And there's so few sales, like there isn't millions and millions of sales. And so you can get a few properties that are just selling a tiny bit short, and it distorts the figures. And I even know with these guys, they do manipulate these numbers to try and normalize them. And so it could easily be positive 2,000 or negative 2,000, just depending on which way they're looking at the numbers and stuff like that. So you got to think, look, it's gone up 250 grand last year. It's dropped 2,000. It doesn't really make that much difference. So, and also what we'll lead to later is that's the average of the whole of Sydney. Some markets are going to be going up, some are going to be going down. So you definitely need to be out on the street or have agents or buyers agents or professionals or yourself actually seeing what's happening for the particular properties that you're investing or buying in that specific area. And actually, just to pick up on we'll pick up maybe some of the questions as we go along, just so that they're still relevant. A question there from YK was 80% leverage is great if available, but as your property portfolio grows over $10 million, would you still suggest keeping the same LVR to reduce it? This is actually one of our clients, so I might get you to answer this, but generally, as you borrow more and more money, it does get harder to leverage. And so generally you can't leverage as high as that. But any thoughts from you, Ben?
Yeah, look, I think that when we do, to answer the question in a slightly different way, when we do financial planning for our clients, one of the key ways that we help them with setting up their plan and making their financial decisions and choosing their strategy is that we use financial modeling tools where we plug in what's your income coming in, what is your spending that's going out, and then what's left over. And we make sure that we do that with not just looking at today, but if you've got, you might have kids and childcare and schooling costs and things that are temporary but important to factor in over the coming years. And then that gives you a baseline that you can start layering different decisions over the top of. A really basic one is that you say, let's just put all of your spare money into a share portfolio. What does that look like? Then we say, okay, well, what if we bought an investment property? What does that look like? And you see, like from that previous example, that the property always wins because of that power of leverage. The I suppose the follow on from that is that the winning strategy is always going to be borrow as much money as you possibly can and then buy as much. And it's normally property, as Chris said, because that's the one that the banks understand the most and are generally comfortable to lend the most against. That's going to move the bottom line the most for anyone, really. So then the question is, like, if you go and gear up to the hilt, there's going to be a level above which it might become uncomfortable for you. You might not want to face that much risk. And you might also realize that, hey, how much risk do I really need to face here? Because if I need to, I want to get to a passive income of $10,000 a month from investments or $20,000 a month or whatever that number is, that will be achievable by getting to a certain point. So you go, okay, well, let's get a pathway to get there. And we don't probably need to push, twice as hard. And, I suppose it depends on the person. But so you think about how much risk that you need, and then, then you can start to de-risk. And I think that when you get above that $10 million mark, like you said, that you probably got a pretty significant amount of property that's growing for you. It probably makes sense to de-risk by maybe having a slightly lower LVR. One other way that you can de-risk, though, is that you might want to keep a bit more cash available, like a bigger emergency fund. I think the more debt that you carry, then an emergency fund number that makes sense probably increases as well. So yeah, I think it really depends on where things are at for you. But I would say that if you would say generally that it probably you start to pull down the LVR, not just driven by what the banks will lend, which is obviously an important consideration, but also just like making sure that you've got a solid risk management strategy in place when you are getting to those higher borrowing levels.
And Sanaz's question, the next question on the chat is similar to that as well. That look, just because you've built equity doesn't mean that you can pull it out. Yes, 100% of borrowing these days is all about serviceability. So in the old days, 10 or 20 years ago, sure, if you had a heart rate and you could sign on a dotted line, you could say, I can afford the loan, you could borrow 80%. Whereas now everything is serviceability. So quite often you can't just finance a property portfolio by itself. You do need other income streams, either from working or business or from your other investments.
And I just wanted to follow on some of those comments you made around the market numbers as well, Chris. And I think this probably is in a future slide, but when they talk about these average property market statistics, like I've seen the properties that you buy for your clients, and I know that our philosophies are aligned with that when we're talking to clients. I buy blue chip suburbs, good quality properties, getting avoiding those, high density, high rises or high strata and all of that sort of stuff. That they're a different market. So when people look at these stats, it's like I'm living over on the northern beaches, and you see that properties, like, they hardly come up. The supply is so tight that when they do come up, they get good prices. The prices are supported. So keep in mind that while these numbers are there, that you might, that it's different markets within markets. And I think that, a lot of people at the moment are talking about this potential interest rate rises and the property market might be dipping slightly, and let's just wait, and we'll stand by and we'll wait for this uncertainty because it could keep going down, and then we'll just jump in and scoop up a bargain and pick the bottom of the market. It reminds me of the exact conversations that I was having with people at the start of the COVID situation, where people were saying, oh no, JobKeeper is going to end, and then the economy is going to fall off a cliff, and everyone was saying the property market's going to tank, and there's not going to be any support, and people going, we'll just wait for JobKeeper to end and see what happens. And I said, the uncertainty is there because, like, the value is there because the uncertainty is there. If you wait for the uncertainty to be gone, then the opportunity is most likely going to be gone with it as well. So if you're buying and the market might be down a tiny bit, like, I feel like if you've got a good strategy and everything else is lined up with your plan, you shouldn't be waiting. You shouldn't be worried about any short-term fluctuations anyway, if they're a little bit up or a little bit down. So no doubt we'll talk a little bit more about that one though. So look, in terms of some things to keep an eye on in the markets, we did see the economy rebounding strongly. The budget that came out just recently showed a significant improvement in the position of the Australian economy. The the Russia-Ukraine conflict has caused some issues globally, but given that Australia is a big exporter of resources, it's actually has strengthened the economy. And while that conflict in particular has been, and we hope is fairly temporary, it seems that the shift, a lot of global companies are rethinking, how they're and where they're accessing their different, gas and petrol and other natural resources from. So that puts the Australian economy in a stronger position moving forward. The RBA is calling out that rate rises are coming, but it's likely to be slower. I think the consensus is potentially 3 over the course of this year. But the RBA have said that they are very, very mindful of the borrowing levels of Australian households, and therefore they're going to be really considered. And I'm sort of reading between the lines, like a lot of other people are as well, that I think that the RBA are hopeful that maybe some natural forces might slow down inflation in a way that they don't need to increase interest rates as much, which I think is an outcome that they'd be pretty happy with, because ultimately I think the RBA do want the economy to keep growing and growing as strongly as possible. They know that raising interest rates will have a dampening effect on that. Another one that I saw, I was reading an article the other day, they were talking about the property stock in Australia and again, Chris would probably know this one much better than I would, but it's still well below the growth in the property stock in Australia is still well below the growth that's needed in to keep up with dwelling builds and people that want dwellings as well, which I think again supports growth in property values moving forward. And the last point there is just that the Australia overall is in a strong position to rebound from this disruption.
Yeah, so one of the questions that has come through as an anonymous one was, with the large increase in prices over the pandemic, what makes you confident that the prices can still increase in the future when the price tags seem so unaffordable to the average salary and rates will be going up? So it's a good question. And look, this was probably one of the biggest questions on Sky News in 10 years. And again, I'm not an economist. I'm sure I'm an accountant, but not really a practicing one. So I'm more kind of hands down seeing what's going on. So that was the biggest question, is how can property prices globally keep going up if wages aren't keeping up with property price inflation? Great question. So the way the economists answered it, and this was a guy, John Edwards from Residex, who predict capital growth. And his answer was, look, first of all, our parents had massive houses on big blocks of land. They had single income earners. They were paying 10 or 15 or 20% interest rates. Now we've got 2 income earners per family. We've now got smaller blocks of land. We've got lower interest rates. We've got first homeowner grants and things like that to help people get into the market. So that's part of the answer. But the ultimate answer was, if you go to areas where there's no more property and people want to live there and they've got a lot of money, prices will carry on going up. So yes, for average Australia or the average world, where people are trying to pay properties on average wages, it is going to struggle. And so those areas are less likely to carry on growing at such a rapid rate. But if you get into areas like Ben mentioned, Bondi, which everyone knows, so it's not the CBD where there's no limit of supply. You can keep building towers and no one wants to live in the CBD. You go to the areas like a Bondi or a Manly or a Balmain or something like that in Sydney, and it's 3-story height limits. There's wealthy people there that they're not buying $100 million properties. They're talking about $1 or $2 million units. There's enough of those people that are paying in cash and they're not worried about wages. They're not worried about interest rates. They're buying a property for their daughter or their granddaughter, and their beautiful, beautiful granddaughter, they want a certain thing. The parents are paying the money or they're giving them deposits. I know I'll be giving my kids deposit. That's the only way they're going to do it. And so basically what his argument was is whether you agree with that from an economy or from a society perspective, that's not the debate we're having. It's more that's what's going to happen. So if there's no more of something and people have got money to pay for it, the basic laws of supply and demand, that's where you're going to get the growth. And that is the magic, which again is the simplest thing, but you've got to be in the game to win it effectively.
Plus, I think that, and I know that this hasn't materialized, like the government tends to forecast wage growth, which hasn't materialized in the recent past, but I don't know, I might be being naive here, but it's hard for me to think that wages aren't going to grow in the next little while. Like when you look, we're hiring, I'm hiring in my financial advice business, and I've been looking at what's the salaries that we need to pay and the expectations in the market, and they've increased significantly just in the last 12 months. We work with a lot of people that work for technology companies, and you see the demand for engineers, coders, product managers, like these technical specialists or salespeople. Like the demand is high and unemployment is ultra low, so people are paying more to get more people. So my view is that we will see a big uptick in wage growth over the next little while in certain sectors. You know, the Australian economy is moving to a lot of service-based roles, and I think that they will continue to grow, which in turn makes it easier to support higher property prices, and gives people hope that they will be able to afford it if they don't have necessarily the family backing and have to do it all on their own. So.
Yeah, and another question that's come through, which is related, and we may as well deal with these questions while they relate to what we're talking about, was if RBA raises interest rates too high, will they crash the economy and effectively crash the property market? And this is one of the introductions in my book, is that it's in the government and the bank's interest to keep property prices stable, because otherwise it will crash the economy. So if you know a bit about economics, most of our economy is built up based on the money lending that the banks do to properties, and they can't afford for voters to all be in negative equity. And so they'll almost do anything they can. And we saw this with COVID, and I thought it was one of the best moves ever, is giving people a mortgage holiday, because it basically meant that they weren't giving a discount to anyone. Most people with a mortgage were happy to delay their payments for 6 months. A lot of them could still get the rents coming in and could still afford it. But it basically didn't hurt anyone by giving everyone a 6-month extension. And so I'm pretty sure that they'll only increase those interest rates at a reasonable rate, so that it doesn't suddenly provide a shock, because if the market went up 25%, they don't want it crashing 25% back to the same value. It's in no one's interest. And so I think that's what they'll do. They'll do whatever they can to do to control that.
Yeah, I think the RBA and the government know that the wealth levels of households is one of the biggest drivers of their spending. So if people's wealth start deteriorating, i.e. property prices start going down, it's going to be really, really bad for the economy. The RBA and the government don't want that to happen. The banks definitely don't want that to happen, because they're the biggest landowners in Australia. So I think given that they're the biggest companies in Australia, plus the government and our Reserve Bank, I think that you can get confidence that they're going to be really smart and strategic with how they do things in a way that isn't going to have a big crash impact. And in fact, I think any sort of signs, like you mentioned, COVID, they're going to do what they can to avoid that happening.
And again, that's potentially why with the last election, Labor didn't get in the end, because they were pushing this negative gearing, which, even though a lot of people might have preferred Labor to get in, a lot of people don't want to risk losing the negative gearing benefits. And so quite often they'll put personal stuff before, I guess, looking out for the general economy.
Absolutely. Chris, these are your points here. Did you want to talk to these ones?
Yeah. So look, I guess the big thing is similar to what I said before, of nothing's really changed in the last 20 or 30 years. These are all potential excuses for people not to get in the market now, or to sit on the fence, like interest rates, election. People love not making a decision when an election comes up. So even with Labor, it was amazing with the last election that if anything, if they were going to take negative gearing out, that would make you buy a property today before the election, because it was likely to be grandfathered if they did take a negative gearing out, which meant that if you already had a property, then you'd still be able to use the negative gearing. But even so, people still didn't buy property. But maybe the day after the election, suddenly everyone was putting DAs in at council and they were queuing up to go and buy property. The main thing is to be an investor is to be a contrarian. If you go and buy property or shares or anything else when everyone else is out shopping, like the Boxing Day sales or something like that, you're going to pay a higher price. and you're not going to have as much choice. Whereas if you buy when no one else is buying, that is the opportunity to get in to make some extra. The main thing is like buy at some point. That's the biggest thing. But if you can do it at the opposite time to everyone else, and again, the last point, have a long-term focus, then that is the biggest thing, because so much of this stuff is consumer sentiment. There's no rational reason of why property markets will suddenly go down or go up, because people are using sentiment rather than logic to buy. Whereas professionals, it's all logic, it's zero emotion, and we just get on with it.
Chris has just added a point on to your election comments to say it was also the franking credits, because the government was trying to tax people's aspirations, which is a good point.
Yeah.
Jane's just got a question here as well, just on serviceability around borrowing with equity in your current home, and saying, do the banks factor in rental income when deciding when you can service? Jane, I think the answer to that is yes, they do. They do, depending on the property and where it is, and mainly where it is, that they will sometimes often shade the servicing at different levels. So they might not count a whole 100% of the rent, but it might be 50% or 75%. Partly depends on the banks as well. So yeah, 100% it's considered. Just depends on which bank and how they look at it as to how much of it is considered. A couple of trends that I've noticed is that we saw the household war chest in Australia. We saved a lot of money during the pandemic. You're welcome, Jane. We saved a lot of money during the pandemic, and now people have had their money sitting on the sidelines for a while, realizing that it's not really doing that much for them, and they're starting to get it mobilized. We're seeing a lot more activity in the property market. Also, I'm seeing the non-property market investing, so shares, ETFs, managed funds in that space, that people are starting to really feel like the money's not working hard enough for them. So I think that ties in with some of the property market growth over the last little bit. Also, for people that do already that were already property owners coming into the last year or couple of years, they've seen significant growth in the value of their property, and so they're sitting on a lot of equity, which they're realizing now that they can actually use to invest, whether it's property or shares or both. So I think that's a trend that we'll see playing out a little bit more in the next little while. And I touched on this before, but we're seeing property buyers going out of the Sydney, Melbourne market, looking at value or where there is value outside of that. I think we, for a long time, when advising clients, have said Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, there's strong population growth. In certain pockets, there is limited supply, and so I think that there is a good opportunity there. But what I'm seeing a lot of people doing is this, I feel like it's almost like a reactive buying into these non-Sydney, Melbourne, maybe Brisbane markets, Adelaide, Hobart, the Byron area, which obviously is lovely. I was just up there last week, but these other places that they feel like it's affordable or it is much more affordable relative to a Sydney or Melbourne market. But I really wonder, if you don't have the population growth, and you're thinking, I lived in Adelaide for 5 years, so love Adelaide, great place, but everyone leaves Adelaide. Young people leave Adelaide. They don't want to live down there. So you sort of wonder, if the population isn't growing as much. Yes, there are really good suburbs that I think will be good investments there, but I don't think that just as a general market, it's necessarily supported in the same way. What's your take on that, Chris?
Yeah, look, a lot of people think it's all about the size of the property you've got, but as everyone says, it's not size that counts. It's all about the quality. Because say for Sydney, $1 million gets you a one-bedroom in Bondi if you're lucky, and that's if you're lucky. Whereas you could go to somewhere like Adelaide maybe, and you get 2 houses for that, or somewhere else in Australia, or you go up to even Brisbane, maybe you get a 4 or 5 bedroom house for that. So people automatically think, 4 or 5 bedroom house, that's got to make more money than a tiny little plot of land that's 65 square meters in Bondi. But the reality is it's all about the quality, because otherwise we'd all take our money and go to the Northern Territory in the middle of the outback and get hundreds of thousands of acres for that $1 million. And so that's the thing is, I always say is, on a summer's day, are you going to get 30, 40 or 50 people queuing up to buy that property or to rent it? Or are there plenty of those around? Whereas you do get that in a Bondi or a Manly or a Balmain or something like that, because as you say, in a block of units, a property might come up once every 10 years. And so you really want to try and find something unique. Whereas if you go to a new land estate, sure, it's nice and cheap, but there's 1,000 properties, they're all the same. And so people don't care which one they buy because they're basically buying something without a view or anything else. So really look at the quality you're buying. I'd much rather a small 1-bedroom unit than a 4 or 5 bedroom house in the middle of nowhere.
Leo's point is a good one here. I think location. We all hear it, but that's what it comes down to.
Exactly. And this is what you've got to read into with the stats. And so there's more than one property market. So where we talk about Sydney, which I mentioned before, there's multiple markets, but even in a Bondi, and again, it's not because we're focused on Bondi, but it's just easy to talk about. So if you look at Bondi, right down at the beach, you've got 20 or $30 million apartments. You've then got, I guess, little studio units, 30 square meters up on Hall Street. You've then got a bunch of semis as you go up towards kind of North Bondi and up towards Bondi Junction. Bondi Junction, you've got a whole bunch of high rises. Bondi Road, you've got a mixture of high rises, you've got a few houses and some semis as well. You've got brand spanking new properties, you've got secondhand properties. So where Bondi, you'll get one statistic to say that the auction clearance rate's this, or the Bondi market's moved in this. But there's so many different properties. $1 million property is going to act differently to the $30 million one. And in a good market, everything's rising. But when you get this mixed market now, the stuff that's on the main road that hasn't got parking, that isn't renovated, that's overly priced or hasn't got a good agent, that's not selling. But good properties that are median price, secondhand, good locations, that's 100% clearance rate. And so this is what you've got to read into things. And that's why you can't do it purely on stats. You've literally got to get on the street and feel it and touch it, or be around people that are, to really know what's going on in the property market.
Jeff's just got a question here, Chris, which I feel like is one probably more for you than for me, but saying, would you prefer a unit with a view or one with a courtyard with more room without a view?
I'll take both. So the whole idea is when you build a portfolio, there's pros and cons to both, and everything's got a price. So obviously things with a view would generally get much more of a price, but certainly with COVID, and if you're living close to the beach and there's not much outdoor space, if you've got a courtyard, it can be a great thing. So my property, so I've got 14 properties, 12 of which are in Sydney, and I've got a mixture of 1s, 2s and 3 beds. Probably the cheapest 1 bed I've got is probably about 850 grand now, kind of almost opposite the beach in Coogee. And my most expensive is probably $2.2 million 3-bed, 3-bath in Tamarama, which for 3 females, they absolutely love, because to have 3 bathrooms when everyone's trying to go out to work at the same time, then I even have it in my house with my wife and my daughter, everyone wanting the bathroom at the same time. So I've got a whole mixture. And my valuer might prefer a few, I might prefer different ones, my property manager might prefer the others, but it's then a blended thing. Just like in financial planning, with shares, you'll have a blend of different shares, and 1s, 2s and 3s might be going up or down, or different rental returns and stuff like that. Then I'll just have a mixture. So definitely with that question, there's pros and cons of both. And I think both have got good reasons to buy either one of those, as long as you're buying at the right price and in the right location, and as long as they've both got parking.
I think diversification is what you're talking to there, that and there's another question on like apartments versus houses, and I feel like it's the same thing, that they all, sometimes we see, apartments growing faster than house prices. Off the back of COVID, we saw house prices growing faster than apartments as people wanted more space. Now we're seeing it sort of flip the other way as well. So I think that if you diversify, if you've got a house and an apartment, or you've got the courtyard and the view, like the highs and low will balance, the highs will balance the lows of the other, essentially.
Yeah. So the main thing with houses and units, they always say like land appreciates, buildings depreciate, so buy a house because there's more land content. But I'm very much, and I go through this in my book, about buying around the median price. Because if you buy around the median price for that local area, it means the majority of the local community can afford to buy it, sell it, or rent it. So typically in Sydney, the median price is roughly $1 million. In that kind of 2 to 15 Ks from Sydney, that gets you a unit. So we've got wealthy people paying tens of millions of dollars, but we still won't buy a house. We'll buy roughly around that $1.5 million level, but multiple units within a block of a $10 million block. So Sydney, I'd always buy a unit. Melbourne, I'd be more into townhouses and semis. Anywhere else in Australia, I'll be buying a house because that's what the average person lives in for the median price in those kind of areas.
So we're just going to go through some of the strategies and tactics. Chris, I might turn this one over to you.
Yeah, sure. So we've gone on to the, right, okay. Yep, I'm looking at two different slide decks at the same time, so that's why I'm getting confused. So look, ultimately, there's not one right strategy that suits everyone. Just like the property with a view or with a courtyard, there's pros and cons of both. And the same is with all of these different strategies. So these are the 6 main strategies. So I'm very much into buy and hold blue chip for the long term. Obviously, you can buy, renovate, and sell. You see all the shows and on TV, and I was part of the Renovator show on Channel 10 years and years ago. There's obviously people that you can buy off the plan and make money with literally no money down, a couple of $1,000 for a deposit bond. Obviously, lots of people are buying interstate these days and buying regionally because of COVID. Then obviously a lot of people have got on the Airbnb bandwagon, where rather than get 3 or 4% rent, you might be able to get 5 or 10%, and obviously the regional thing as well. But look, my main thought, kind of cutting to the chase, and you can buy a book on each one of these. There'll be 6 different books. But I just think for high income earners, and high income earners, I'm talking about kind of 50 to 100 grand plus, and professionals, which I think a lot of the audience are today. If you're working a full-time job, most of you aren't going to be in the business of getting on your hands and knees and doing all these renovations and developing and having all that time to invest. So I'm very much a passive investor. And so I love the buy and hold blue chip, because the ins and outs of some of this other stuff, 100 square meter unit, you can only change to a 100 square meter unit that's slightly better. If you want to buy a house, you're then investing millions of dollars, and it can be a volatile market. So if you're not a full-time renovator, it's a very dangerous thing to do. And most of the time it costs twice as much, and it takes twice as much time. Buying off the plan is one of the riskiest things in the world. And you've really got to have big balls to go and do that, because who knows what things are going to be like in a year or two. And you buy them off professional sellers, which are developers. They're the clever ones, and they're the ones selling it. You're not buying at a wholesale price. You're effectively paying retail, and you hope it's worth that money in 2 years when it settles. And again, buying the interstate and the regional, it's very, very hard. Places like Byron are beautiful. There's lots of beautiful places, but unless there's queues of people and there's massive influx of people with high wages, will the property prices be able to sustain it? And again, the Airbnb, when we got into COVID, suddenly Airbnb was banned. Then it suddenly came back, and then Airbnb has been absolutely massive because people can't go overseas. And so you're going through all these ups and downs. I'm very much a long-term buy and hold, and I really think that's the safest strategy. And this is what the banks like. So when you see in the papers, they talk about the black spots, they're talking about places that have got massive new buildings like the Piermonts in those days, or out at Parramatta and stuff. And they're worried about regional towns because they haven't got the high income earners. Sure, people might buy a holiday house out there, but they haven't got the wages to keep up for all the locals to be able to pay that kind of money as well. So unless you're really an expert in one of those areas, I'd stick to a buy and hold and set and forget.
And just a couple of comments on there. One, with the off the plan stuff, it's not even only the property market value risk that Chris mentioned, that you like I like how you said that there, that you're buying off a professional seller, which is entirely true. So you hope that you've got a reasonable price. In a rising market, maybe you can win, but if you do pay overs, then you pay the price. But the most important thing, and we saw a lot of people run into trouble with this, that mortgage targets change quite quickly, how the banks assess your ability to borrow. So if you bought an off the plan property today and you look at how much you can borrow today, that might be fine. But if the banks change their rules in a month's time or 6 months' time or any time before you complete, you're on the hook for that purchase, and you might not have the money there to cover it. So it can be really risky. I think buying you can be great, has some great tax benefits attached to it. But when you look at the risk, like just you want to make sure that you've got a really solid risk management plan in place if you are even contemplating going down that path, and make sure you got your I's dotted and your T's crossed.
And look, the tax benefits are quite often false economies. So say if you buy a property that's worth $1 million, but you've overpaid and you paid 1.1 because it was not off the plan, even if you get 10 grand back in tax, you're going to have to spend 10 years just to get your money back in those tax benefits. And so look, if I was selling off the plan, I would sell it based on the tax benefits because that's the emotional plug that people like. But the reality is I'd rather something old and secondhand that looks decrepit that I can improve. Whereas just like we know, a secondhand car, it's going to devalue as soon as you start moving it and it starts getting old.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be interested to hear your take on this one, Chris. But I think, having a good dream team around you that can make sure that you're covered. Property is a big decision that has a lot of moving parts and requires a lot of inputs. But this is your dream team list here, Chris.
Yeah, and look, certainly it's about creating a lifestyle. So, as well as I guess being known as a property person, a lot of people know me as my lifestyle, and especially if you see my socials and stuff, I'm generally out on boats and cars and traveling the world. And it's because I've tried to set up not only a career, but also my property portfolio, that I want to spend more time at the beach and being out in the sun. That's why I moved from cold and wet UK into Australia, because I wanted to have a life. And so certainly when I was doing Sky News before, people say, I don't want to take up any of your time. You must be so busy. Like you've got 14 properties to manage. You've got a young family. You travel overseas 15 times a year. You do Sky News. You run your business. You're doing all this different stuff. And I'm saying, hey, mate, I've got all the time in the world. For a lot of people that know me, I'm trying to work just 7 till 9 in the morning these days, doing emails and writing stuff. And then obviously doing odd bits and pieces like this. But I've actually got so much free time. It's because I value my time. And also I value that I'm not going to be as good as an expert that does it 24/7. So Ben's been doing financial planning for donkey's years. I'm never going to be able to, as a part-timer, get his knowledge, or with the mortgage brokers or with the accountants. I'm an accountant. I studied 5 years to do it, but I don't do my tax returns. I've got no idea what the latest thing is, because the person that sets up my trust, they've done it for 30 years. All they talk about all day is trust. So I know I've got the right person. So the key to really freeing up your life is you've got to spend money. It's much better to spend money on financial planners and accountants and mortgage brokers, which are quite often free anyway, or even buyer's agents and stuff like that, because then you can make more money. And so I often quite think of it like the managing director of a business. He doesn't do most of the work. He makes the decisions, but he has his accounts team, his sales team, his marketing. They're all his little experts or kind of minions around him. They do all the work. They come up with all the advice. He makes the decision, and he's the one that makes the money. So all of these people are really, really important, and you need them all on the same line, so that if you went to Ben and Ben said, yeah, sure, go and buy some property, and then you came to me and I said, oh no, buy some off the plan, Ben would be thinking, no, it's like, I don't think that's cool. And so suddenly you've got advisors that are on different pages, and maybe they're incentivized different. You really need your team all to sing off the same song sheet, so that they're not saying conflicting things. You're all on the same path, and that'll give you the confidence that if you're investing millions and millions of dollars and taking on debt, you're confident that all the people around you know what you're doing and they all think it's a good idea.
And look, I think that you want to make sure when you're choosing your people that you ask them the questions on what their philosophies are, and you make sure that they gel with what you think is important to you before you go and engage them. Because there are property people that talk about off the plan properties. If that's really what you want, I would advise against it. But if that's really what you want, then you seek out someone that's like that. And then if you seek out a financial planner, you probably want someone that's going to be behind that sort of strategy to a degree as well. I suppose you need to balance getting someone to sometimes challenge your opinions, but essentially, I think it's really great to have multiple people especially in different businesses, instead of just having one integrated business where it's like they just usher you into one office after the other, and you know that the people going to be somewhat, required to say the same, like singing from the same song sheet. But I think check in on those philosophies first, and it means that you're at least you're not going to run into that trouble when you're too far down the path as well. But I also think that good advice in any of the areas that are up here, that whether it's mortgage broking, buyers agents, accountants, financial planning, it should be a profit center, not a cost. Like, yes, you might invest a few bucks to start off with, but it will save you more money or make you more money from doing that. I know with our financial advice, we quantify that we know that the average upside from doing a plan with us is $71,000 a year. So you might pay 10 grand or something for a financial plan, but if you're making 71, you're paying 10 to make 71, then you can see you're ahead. And then every year after that, you're in clear profit territory. So again, when talking to these people, talk about how they do that. And it's probably a good segue into this one from you, Chris.
And actually, just a quick thing. So we've got a few questions going into the Q&A. It'd actually be good if you could actually cut and paste those back out into the chat, because then everyone will be able to see the question in the chat. And so then we can get to the heart of it straight away rather than reading it through. So Jane, if you're there, if there's any chance of chucking that into the chat, then we'll answer that and we can get everyone to read it. But look, as Ben said, is in our parents' generation, everything was about look after the pennies look after the pounds. So why pay someone else to do something that you could do yourself? But as Ben said, say for the financial plan, why wouldn't you pay 10 grand for a financial plan if that means that you're going to save or make 70 grand? And the same thing is with the buyer's agent. Look, my dad would never buy anything off anyone that drove a BMW because he said that they're too highly paid. Whereas the argument these days is, do you want to buy something off someone that's got a $200 car? Because do they know how to make money if they can only drive a $200 car? Whereas surely the guy driving the BMW, if he's got some success, then maybe he's good at what he does. And so the thing with the buyer's agent is typically every property in Sydney generally goes to auction. We virtually never go to auction. And so if we're trying to buy $1 million property at auction, generally it will go for $1,050,000 or 1.1. So there'll be enough people there that will fight for it to push it up to $1,050,000 or 1.1, because typically they bid based on what the bank will lend them and how much money they've got to spend, not what the intrinsic value of the property is. So if we can get $1 million property, and we typically charge 2% plus GST, so we might be charging, say, 20 or 25 grand to go and manage that purchase. Not only have you got an expert that's maybe done it for 30 years that will go for the ugly duckling in a better location rather than the beautiful off the plan that's going to depreciate straight away, but if we can buy that $1 million property for $1 million versus $1,050,000 or 1.1, then again, surely you've saved that 25 to 75 grand again. But I find people are either, especially business people, they're used to spending money to invest. Whereas I think typically a lot of employees need to try and learn that mentality to learn to delegate and to pay experts, because you are actually well far ahead.
We might need to just give the quick version of these, being mindful of time, Chris, because we've got a few more stats to throw at you guys as we go through.
So look, these are the typical mistakes. So most people, they're trying to get too clever, but they end up doing nothing. And so, basically nothing happens. Then the majority of people, they're trying to time the market all the time. They get involved in all the emotions rather than concentrate on the numbers. Some of the people ask, why am I so good at property investing? It's because I'm an accountant. I've got no emotion. I had to learn it when I got married, because you need some emotion in a marriage. But when it comes to investing, I'm very much about the purely about the numbers. And it's searching for the best property. It's not the best looking property that's good to brag to all your mates and the rest of it. It's finding the one that actually has the right financials. I haven't seen a lot of my properties for 10 or 15 years inside, but if they've grown from $500,000 to $1 million to 1.5, who cares what it looks like? That's the main things.
Absolutely. And I think that when it comes to property as well, there are a lot of different things that you can do, but where people tend to go wrong is when they're just getting started, that they're trying to pick some high risk, high potential reward investment. People do this with share investing a lot as well. Then they get the foundations all wrong. So I think if you're trying to build serious wealth for the future, get the right foundations in place that you can then build on, so that you get good results and do it without the setbacks and failure. Another thing, some people that we talk to, they may have tried buying property before and it didn't work out that well for them in the past. That's really unfortunate. But oftentimes when you drill into the strategy, that if you look at it objectively, that maybe they weren't, being really solid with their plan and approach. So like, I get that it's painful to get back on the horse, or it can be a bit scary if you've been down that path before, but you don't want to let the fact that it hasn't worked out for you the way that you wanted in the past stop you from, or mean that you end up ignoring this massive asset and vehicle that you can use to grow serious wealth.
Yeah, so look, this is a classic graph that we just put together in the next slide as well. So this is the property price increases over the last 40 years. So roughly from the 80s to 2022. So if you look at that graph, the main things to pick up from that is, look, anytime you bought in that graph, if you've held on long enough, you've made money on it. But some people would look at it in kind of after the GFC and after the kind of 17 crash or downturn, then maybe that isn't the right time to buy. But the reality it is, and if we move on to the next slide, I just thought we'd take a look at the next kind of 6 years. So if you think back to 2016, 17, so 17 was the last peak. So lots of people over that period, because the property prices were going up so high, they said, I'm not going to buy now because property prices are going to get too expensive. And at some point they're going to crash and they're going to peak, which obviously they did. So people didn't buy them. Then in 18, 19, if you remember, we had the credit crunch. So the property market was going down. People would say, why would I buy today? Even though there's no competition, it's easier to buy. Why would I buy today? Because tomorrow it's going to be even less. So I'm better off waiting another few months and I'll time the bottom of the market. Then we had the Royal Banking Commission, which then made it even harder to borrow money. So property prices were still going down. But if you actually see there, the property prices, sure, they dropped a bit, but then they bounced back up anyway. Then we got into 2020, February, the market was about to start to increase. It was starting to go off. Then we got hit by COVID effectively in March. And then for the whole of that, people were saying, don't buy property. It's COVID. We've had a GFC. We've had nothing like this before. The world's going to come to an end. So no one bought. Then in 2021, for the first 6 months, February, it then kicked off. And so suddenly that was the window that pretty much everyone in the world agreed now's a good time to buy property. But literally within 5 or 6 months, then people were saying, oh, it's already gone up 10 or 15%. I'm too late. I've missed it. It can't go on forever. And so for the second half of 2021, no one was buying because the market's going to crash. Now we're into 2022, the market's come off. And as we saw in March, it went down $2,000 of the 250 grand it's risen. So, and that's just the average market. We'd argue that the blue chip markets are still rising in value. Now people are saying, don't buy, elections, interest rates, crash, all this kind of stuff. So in summary, if you look for that 6-year period of when all your friends and your family and your colleagues would back you to say, yes, this is a good time to make you feel better and more confident, you would have looked at that 6 months. But the people that just got in back in 16 and the property prices have gone from 800 to almost 1.2 million, they would have made 350, 400,000. So if you wait for perfect conditions, sure, you're going to make a small bit of money, but you're going to miss out on hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that compounded over your lifetime. That's the missed opportunity. So my golden rule is I buy when I can get a mortgage from a bank. I buy when I can get a property at a reasonable price. And I buy when I've got enough buffer that effectively I can hold on for the short to medium term. And that's why I've built a $20+ million portfolio, not from being clever, from just buying every time I've got some money to then go and get into the market.
What you can also see, I think, on here is that the opportunities, which even looking back, if you did have all the data, like the time periods where it is like the right or the best opportunity are so small when you look over like a 10-year period, that it's like, are you really going to want to only wait and buy property once every 10 years as well? So look, guys, I hope you found that helpful. Obviously, we've covered a lot of ground. I can see that there are a ton of questions in the Q&A, but I'm mindful that we have gone a little bit over time. Look, I hope you guys have got some really great
So why don't we go through this? Let's get through the slides, and then if people need to run off, they can. But we may as well hang around, and we'll answer those extra questions at the end if people have got the extra time.
Yeah. Cool. So look, guys, I just got this quote here from Derek Sivers. I love Derek. He's a really smart cookie, but he talks about if information was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs, and talks to the fact that what you don't need to get results is more ideas. And hopefully you've got some good ideas today, but you need to take action. It's action that drives results. And building your knowledge is a key, I think, to taking that action and doing it with confidence. So guys, from today, we're going to send around the recording and some slides. Chris has got some tools available. Did you want to talk to this, Chris?
Yeah, so the idea of today is obviously we can't tell you everything you need to know about financial planning and property in an hour. So it's really to give you a taste, and then if you want some more. So if you go to this link, and we'll email the link around later on, basically the main book I've got is called The Effortless Empire, which I talked about writing almost 20 years ago. That really is how to kind of build a whole portfolio of properties. Should you buy new, secondhand, cheap, expensive, all those classic kind of questions. But also there's a really fun book in there as well called, and I wrote this about a year ago, called How to Live the Life of a Multi-Millionaire Without Being One. So if you want to live in a bigger house and you can't afford it, or if you want to be into better cars or boats or overseas travel, whatever your thing is, I can generally find a way to be contrarian to do it in a lot quicker time frame, or even on the same budget. So it's a really fun book, and it's practical things that I'm doing myself. So someone said earlier on one of the questions about rent vesting. Rent vesting is a big thing I do. So I don't live in my own home, haven't lived in my own home. As you can see behind me, I live in a fantastic place in Darling Point, but I buy lots of little properties and I rent a home for about a third of the price that it would cost me to buy. So the details are in the books and stuff, and we'll certainly send you the links, or just go on the QR code there.
Great. We've got a bunch of content as well, which you can access on the Pivot Wealth website. I'm trying to take over TikTok at the moment, so anyone that wants to get in on the ground level there, you're very welcome. You can check that out. And I also run a podcast called How to Be Successful with Money, which you can check out on the podcast platforms place. We also this is the sort of stuff that we help people with. So we'll send around a link later on, but if anyone wants to hook us up for a quick 10-minute chat, basically just Q&A, what are the opportunities for you? And, what should you be thinking about now? If we think we can help, we can talk about how. If we can't, we can point you in the right direction as well. So we'll shoot that around, and any questions, obviously, off that, you can send them to us as well. So we do actually have a few questions here.
So I might just pick up on Jane's one. So Jane was saying she lives in the country. So I think this is a classic bar and bay thing that we've heard in the papers, that suddenly all of the tourists have come up to Bar and Bay. And I'm not sure if you're talking about Bar and Bay, but similar kind of things. And all of the tourists are now renting all the Airbnbs. So where you used to maybe rent out your house for $500 a week, they can then knock it out on Airbnb for probably $2,000 a week. So the problem is there's suddenly no accommodation for all the local workers. And so what Jane's saying is, well, maybe is there an opportunity to build, I guess, properties for local workers that are maybe half an hour outside of Byron or whatever town we're talking about? And look, yes, that probably is an opportunity. But again, the problem is that's people on average wages in that area that are then going to be renting or trying to buy those things. And so I'd much rather stick to a main capital city where there's lots of suits in the city, lots of people on high paid jobs. Just like Ben was saying before, all of these people in tech jobs that are earning big bucks as coders and stuff, they're the people that I generally want to rent my properties. Not that I've got anything else against someone that's working in a cafe or a bar or a pub or those local jobs, but they're the ones that I think can then support my property prices much more than an average price worker. So unless you've got a skill in a specific area, I'd go with the mainstream and go where the majority of the money is. But obviously it comes with a price point of trying to get into that market for that price.
And I was going to add to when you had that slide up before, Chris, as well, talking about regional or the areas outside of what I would say is the ones that are super close to the CBD, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Once you do go outside of that sort of 10, 15-ish K bracket, probably 10, maybe, you're getting a different sort of tenant in those properties as well. Like you said, like in the regional areas, it's the same, that people are working in different sorts of jobs to the people that are renting properties in Bondi, and Coogee and Mossman and those sorts of places. And look, the reality is that it's those, there might be trades occupations or, nurses or, tradies, that sort of stuff. Like, they're more subject to fluctuations in what happens with the economy, which means that when you think about it from an investor point of view, for just getting consistency of your rental income, which is important when you look at your income return, then you can have, higher vacancy rates, more turnover, potentially periods without rent. I know that people need places to live. And of course, that's important. But when that's talking about, to Chris's previous slide, when you go the numbers focus, when you've got your pure investor hat on versus the emotions and social cause that you should be thinking about. But we probably just want to jump to one of the most important questions here, which is, Chris, what car do you drive? I know the Lambo's gone now, unfortunately, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was always known for Porsches, Ferraris, and Lamborghinis. And so one of the main conversations in the Millionaires book is, how can a Lamborghini be cheaper than a BMW? So if you're into your cars, I show you and I prove with numbers how a Lamborghini Murcielago, which retails for 750 grand new, can be cheaper than a BMW or a Mercedes. But I've now gone off my fast cars. My oldest car is a 1912 Ford Model T with a crank handle, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, if anyone's old enough to remember those movies. I bought a fire engine recently. I've got a stretch limousine that I use as a rally car through the outback. So I'm building a portfolio of cars, not as really as an investment, but I've gone all quirky. I've got a 53 Buick that's going to have flamethrowers out the back. So look at my socials, and on the stories, you'll see a whole range of different cars coming around, but most of them are cheap now. So I've gone from expensive to cheap, but a whole variety. So at the moment, I've got about 9 cars, but quite a few are being built. So they're not all complete at the moment.
You're putting my family wagon to shame, but it's only big enough to fit in 2 car seats plus cats and everything else when we go.
You've got to think about my poor kids. My daughter went to high school, and I think the 3rd day I took her by fire engine into the city, and someone came up to her and said, "Are you Sophie with the fire engine?" They do get embarrassed with their dad, unfortunately. So they'd rather take the train to school these days.
Naomi's got a question here. Good one for you, Chris. How do you find a good buyer's agent?
Oh, look, it's
giving you a call, I suppose.
It's very hard to find a very good one. There's a few out there, but there's not many that, I guess, walk the talk and build their own portfolio. So look, certainly if you want to have a chat with us, so we run the Sydney office. We've then got affiliate offices if you're looking interstate in Melbourne and Brisbane. And then we've got a network of other buyer's agents. So if you're looking in Perth or Adelaide or Gold Coast, something like that, then certainly get in touch. Just chris@yourempire.com.au, and we can hook you up, or you can have a chat with us and or chat with me as well.
And we just got one last question here from Leo, but just a comment from Jane. Jane, that's a shelf, those books stacked, so that's nice and stable and toddler proof. So you don't need to stress about that. Leo said, what you mentioned, numbers over emotions. What are the most important numbers that you look at to pick a property?
Yep. So again, in the Empire book, I go through most of those numbers. So I don't get into lots of detail with the properties. So I'm basically looking, so on my spreadsheets, effectively the property value, the mortgage, and then effectively your net equity. and then the cash flow, which is obviously rents coming in, mortgage going out. I generally work on about 1.25% for expenses. So all my property management fees, my land tax, all of those kind of things. So I'm really looking at only about 5 or 6 numbers. And I try and keep things as simple as possible rather than getting down to dollars and cents. And look, this is where quite often we send clients to someone like Ben. When someone's really detailed orientated, Ben has the software that can deal with dollars and cents and work out your cash flows, where your money's coming in and out. Because not everyone's, I'm very big picture with my numbers. I just think of like $1 million property, it might cost me 5 or 10 grand a year, but go up by 50 or 100. A lot of people really need to see the cash flow, especially if they're leveraging and numbers are tight. And we don't have those bits of software, nor do mortgage brokers. So that's where you really need the financial planning skill base and stuff like that in there. But look, go through the Empire book, and that should answer most of your questions about those kind of things.
Awesome, guys. Well, look, any questions that we haven't got to, feel free to reply to Chris and I are going to shoot out emails later today. I hope you found that helpful. Any feedback, let us know if you want us to do this again. I've enjoyed the conversation, so maybe we will.
Yeah, Chris. That's good.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Bye for now.